Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name's Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. I'm glad you're here. It is episode 36. And, folks, it's crazy. It's episode 36. Isn't that crazy? Right side up with Steve Staggs. We're back again. It is Friday, 11 o'clock Central Texas time. It is January 12th. And I'm going to tell you something, folks. Things got pretty exciting over this last week. We've had a lot of stuff happen in crypto, and a lot of people are encouraged. And I think, taking a breath, I suppose, that people are kind of like, oh man, maybe things will actually get better. And this is obviously in the crypto world. But of course, all sorts of things looming related to recession and war and all of those things. And I think that as we continue to do this, 36 episodes later, is having some context and perspective of where we are and what is this stuff, what are all these tools and how we animate those. And I feel like this is a good grounding for me, right? Because I see all kinds of stuff happening in our community, and you're just like, can't we all just get along? And you know what? No, it doesn't look like we can. And you have to constantly examine yourself. And that's the thing that I feel like is so helpful with Steve, right? We're just examining ourselves and we're asking these questions and seeing where it leads and really trying to, I find, have the proper perspective, right? Because there's all kinds of things that are lying to us. And it's like, well, what's the right perspective for us to have? So who do we go to? We go to people with experience. And you know what? Just like you wouldn't take, financial advice from, a 2-year-old, let's not take spiritual advice from a 2-year-old. So that's what we're going to do today with our friend, Steve Staggs. Ladies and gentlemen, the man of the 2 hours. What's up, Steve?
Hey man, how you doing?
Oh, we got a little audio weirdness now. Just something.
Is it
Yeah,
not coming through?
It's going brrrr. So it's doing
Ah,
something weird here. I'm going to pull you out for a second here. You might want to reboot that.
okay.
All right, folks, let's say hello to you in the chat while he gets his audio together. Mike Ostel, what's up, dude? Good morning, beautiful right side up brothers and sisters. It's so great to see you every time in the chat, but I'm most curious about this statement. Great day for an old Porsche and a twisty road. So here's the question. Do you have an old Porsche? 2, what year is it? And I couldn't agree with you more. There is nothing like having a vehicle that's like on rails in one of those like the hill country of Texas, right? Just out in the middle of nowhere, just windy road. There's something about that, and it has to be the internal combustion engine. None of this electric stuff, right? Mike, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Quinn, hello, Quinn. Thanks for being here. David Lee, all the way from Southwestern Indiana. He's back again. Appreciate all of you doing this and being a part of this. And hopefully it's a benefit to you, because it certainly is a benefit to me. And, there's a lot of things going on in this world. And a lot of times the conversations I have with Steve are really about, hey, what are your thoughts on this? What are your perspective? And, what I love about that is, hey, I'll give you my experience, my perspective, but then why don't you go ask him yourself? And that kind of constant reminder, as I think the thing that we ultimately want to pass along. Hey, why don't you ask him yourself? And to think that we're in a situation where we don't see everything. Well, that's obvious. Steve, are you back? Oh, no audio. Go ahead and you're on the mute button. Click your mute button there. See if you can get that back, because it doesn't have you on audio. There you go.
How's that?
We're back.
Yeah, we're back?
We're back.
Okay. We
We're
may
back.
need to do this once or twice. I just looked at my buds and they're down to 40%. So I'm going to kind of keep an eye on that, and we may need to make an adjustment along the way.
Gotcha. I will let you know. Oh my gosh. Okay. Mike Ostel had a 1965 356 SC. Turns out I'm not the only Porsche guy around here. You know what's amazing about that? Is one of the most beautiful cars.
Yeah.
They were a bit underpowered out of the factory. Many people have done all kinds of conversions on those, but that is one of the most beautiful designs. The question is, was it a convertible or not? Because the convertible 65 356 in gray with a wide body kit is what I would prefer. But I'm definitely jealous. Are you into cars at all, Steve?
I was at one time. Yeah,
Were you?
bet.
Were you?
Yeah. I drove muscle cars when I was a younger man, and drove Porsches myself, and
Did you?
Stuff like that. So I've been there. Had drove Jaguars in the day, the XJ12s.
Yeah,
and
I remember those.
Was the then when I got to be a family man, got into I think it was the second model year of the Cadillac Seville, which was the first um, fully computerized vehicle produced by General Motors,
Wow.
and I was a test case. Um, in those days, your warranty was 12 months or 12,000 miles, and the dealer had my car for more months and miles than I did in the first year. So
Wow.
yeah. So I've played around with it a bit. Mike and I've had some pretty fun conversations about that.
That is so awesome. That is so
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I just I wanna see what color was it, Mike? That's what I wanna know. I'm way too into this stuff. So let's take a look. This is the 65 3. Oh, look at that right there. Whoo,
Yeah.
man. I
Yeah.
just love that. There's something about that era. And of course, I'm a big fan of the convertible. Obviously, because it's the convertible, but it's just got that kind of really, it's that classic look. But that era is my favorite of the even though I kind of rag on the electric conversions, um, when they do those electric conversions on those body kits like that, they're like screaming fast and they're just
Yeah.
beautiful. So bright red, he says, not a convertible. It was hot. Awesome. That's great. I love that stuff. Well, Steve, I got some questions for you and such. And kind of kicking off today. A lot's going on in the world. I don't know if you saw this, but um, I think we, with the UK, the US, had a joint operation to um, basically fire on Yemen. We've got all kinds of unrest in the world, but when we look at what people, I guess, would define as World War III, we're getting really close, if not already into it. Um, there's a lot going on, and you've often said, let's not add any energy to this thing, right? Let it fall. But it got me thinking about like just the future, right? Just thinking about things seem like they're accelerating. I'm really interested in all the disclosure stuff and the alien stuff and how that all fits together. And I'm just seeing that accelerate significantly. Technology, AI, all this stuff is, things are advancing. But then I'm like, all right, let me look at, things like Revelation, right? And I read and understand, what's to come. And I really kind of interested in your perspective of saying, I read this stuff and I make this kind of assumption that these things will happen. And I think at a certain point, I look back and I go, well, the things that were spoken actually happened like every time. How much of this, when we look at, um, you know, our our efforts as, you know, kind of Elohim man, right? This ability for us to make choices, right? And us to kind of animate the tools and us to make choices. How much of this, when I read the, Revelation, is inevitable or will end up coming about? Like how should I see that and think about um those things to come? Because you've talked about many times is like don't give it more energy, right? Let it, let it happen. How should we see that? How should we think about it? Because there's a part of me that thinks that whatever we do, there's a certain plan that's going to end up happening. What are your thoughts there?
Well, there is a plan that is going to happen. That's the nature of the Supreme. Um, I think we touched on a little bit in the past that the distinguishing capability of the divine is the ability to decree and then fulfill and enforce that decree without deviation. Um, no other being has the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And so you see things like Jesus saying, when James and John's mother came and said, "Hey, in your kingdom, grant that one of my sons sits on your right and one of my sons sits on your left." And Jesus says, woman, you don't know what you're asking for. It is not mine to give. So Jesus, even as the Son, the Word that became flesh, in the Christian context, the second member of the Trinity, there's certain things he doesn't have the capacity to do. Other places he says things like, the time and the end is set by my Father's own authority. Neither the angels nor the Son of Man knows the time or the place. There is nobody that knows when that is going to come to its terminating point except the Father. He's reserved that for his own authority. So the first part of your question about a plan, the inevitability of the plan of God, that's going to happen.
Okay.
That the way he has laid it out from before time began, and oh, by the way, we have mentioned in the past that the primary role of time itself is to choreograph events and circumstances and resources to produce the decrees that are inherent to the plan of God that bring about the termination and conclusion of his plan, which is that, and Paul talks about it in Corinthians about that God would be all in all, that the whole mission of the Son, with Jesus at the helm, is to build the kingdom, expel all adverse influences to render them inoperable, and then deliver the kingdom to the Father so that he may be all in all. That's the end. That's the end of the plan. Now, when the plan is then the implementation of the plan, or the purpose of the plan is to achieve his vision, which is that as man, both male and female, that as man would rule his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. So, the rulership, since rulership deals with adversaries, things that jeopardize, and the role of ruling is to subdue those and to render them neutralized, then our role to come into his nature and character and rule is before that terminating event. We participate with Jesus in building the kingdom and then expelling, i.e. ruling over those things that jeopardize the Father's plan. And then when all of that is done and subjected, that it's at that time that the Son then delivers to the Father his kingdom.
Okay.
So that he might be all in all. So that's an overview of the plan. So the plan is not at issue. What is at issue is the deviant perspectives about what that plan is about. And they are myriad. It is astounding the number of belief systems that have been built out of the book of Revelation. Every single one of them in the name of truth. So the issue is not the plan. The issue is the deviant views of the plan, which I was among. Okay, I was a chief proponent of a number of those deviant views. That's what the problem is. And that's what creates confusion, and confusion creating insecurity and instability, and then us ending up ourselves being neutralized because we bought into the confusion of the lies that have been injected into the plan.
Okay, that's super helpful. All right, so let me then try to dissect this in an interesting way. I'm not interested, at least today, in talking about eschatology and pre-trib, post-trib, amillennialist, whatever it is. I'm not interested in that at all today.
Yeah.
What I'm more interested in is when I look at the scriptures and I think about, this process of looking at the original, the best that we've got of
Yep.
translation, and trying to understand that with Jesus, right? Asking him about these things. What did you mean by this, right? That practice, and seeing fruit from that, right? Wow, okay, that's really helpful to understand that. And then, our dialogue about, hey, let's understand how this thing is built, and then what's the purpose of it, why, all those things, which I think are great. I could point to a number of cases previously in which he's kind of given us some tips, kind of
Yeah.
given us and he's given many people some foreknowledge. And not, it doesn't have to be specific, but one of the things that I would generally say is that there's this truthfulness about the things that would come about, even to the surprise of many, right? A hand comes through the wall and writes on the
Yeah.
wall, and you're like, bro, I'm going to tell you what's about to happen. And you see a lot of this. I mean, a lot of these stories are like, hey, this was a dream and they were bowing down to me. And what does that really mean? Right. So I feel like in a lot of the parables and in a lot of the dreams and a lot of we could misunderstand what's actually happening. And I would say, if there's anything consistent for me, it's like I misrepresent things. I think they're one way and they're actually another, and they're way better. And they're like, oh my goodness, how brilliant is that? Right. So
Yeah.
in retrospect, I'm always like, this is wonderful. But when I look at the book of Revelation, I think about these things like we talk a lot about the mark of the beast, right? And I look at this, this idea of, Satan's on the run, and I hear things like the transfer, and like thinking about what does it mean, the transfer in me? What does it
Yeah.
mean as me being the man being built, the temple of the Holy Spirit? What does it mean to be God's man? What does it mean to be Elohim man? What does it mean to rule? And the question is, where do you properly put things like what seems to be a one world government, which seems to be a mark of the beast, which seems to be kind of this enslavement of can't buy and sell? Where do I put things like beheaded? Where do I put things like all of that stuff, regardless of when he returns? But all these things that are kind of foretold, what do you take seriously? What do you don't? How do you dissect that? And how should we view it? Because I think, carrying the pole, whether you've got a blister on your toe or not, you carry the pole, right?
Yeah.
It didn't go into the details of like, yeah, so and so who was walking around, the city of Jericho had, bunions. We don't talk about that, but there's likely the case. You get what I'm saying? Is that
I
it's
do.
like, where does that fit? Like, how should we see this stuff? Should we take it seriously? Should we just go, well, we'll see?
Yeah, Matt. Great questions as always. We've said it 1,000 times, of course, that's an exaggeration, but probably not too far off. And during these streams, welcome to our phone conversations. And
Yeah.
once again, you've invited folks into, what our phone conversations look like. The kind of questions that you are asking are now transitioning from religious concept to practical reality. And the difference is that I'm not obligated to live the concepts that I espouse and promote, but I am required to live the reality I find myself in.
Yeah, not the truth.
And so times like this and the questions that you're asking are demonstrating that transition from a concept for which I bear no obligation to participate in myself, even though I may demand others to do it.
Yeah.
To that of, okay, now what does this actually look like in real life as I'm living and breathing it every single day, whether I recognize it or not, but by God, something is happening and I'm not exactly sure what that is. How, Lord, do I need to be positioned with this?
Yeah.
So that's how I'm hearing your question.
That's exactly how I'm saying it.
Okay. Because of that question that's now starting to transition from concept to practical reality, now we can start drawing on some of the things that we've been talking about over these many episodes that are not intended to be religious concepts. These are actually how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. Okay. For example, the book of Revelation has pretty much been turned into a book that foretells the future.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, it has become event oriented. Once something is event oriented, we have an episode where we talked about that. We've been trained to become event oriented. And when you're event oriented, what happens is you then start making decisions based on the circumstances that you find yourself in. And when you then start dealing with circumstances and dealing with the circumstances, what's happening to you is you are reacting to those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? When you react, you are the second one acting. And so you are now in a position of being led, of being controlled, of being maneuvered.
Under an authority of another?
Under the authority of another. Exactly. That's the impact and effect of being event-oriented.
Interesting.
As opposed to being proactive. Now, how do we enter into the domain of proacting? Can't do it apart from Jesus.
Real proaction. Real
proaction.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. Now, what is the element of proacting? Let's connect the dot there. Paul makes this very interesting statement. He says, we have been seated with Christ in heavenly places.
Right.
So that's the practical reality. Yep. There's no way to understand what in the world is happening, literally, apart from Jesus. And where is Jesus seated? In the heavenly places. What's he doing in the heavenly places? He's administering the Father's plans. He's executing the Father's strategies. He's dealing with the implementation of what the Father has set in place before time began. So if we want to be involved with what he's doing, Jesus, will you teach me how to sit with you? You have positioned me there. Will you actually teach me how to sit with you in heavenly places so I can see this thing the way that you see it? Now, the way you and I describe it in the vocabulary we use is, hey, Jesus, how do you see that? How do you see that situation? Am I seeing that correctly? Am I in sync with you with what I'm seeing? Wait till he says to you, Steve, what do you see? Whoa, what do you mean, what do I see? I'm more interested in what you're seeing. I get it. Steve, what do you see? And he starts training you. You don't recognize this in the beginning. But when he asks those kinds of questions, what he's doing is he's demonstrating what it is to be trained to sit with him and to see with him, to hear with him, and to act with him. Now, that's what we've been talking about over these previous episodes, and now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what that actually looks like. So, if we want to look at the circumstances around us and start reacting to them, we're toast.
Okay.
We're just going to be led around. We're going to be moving with the momentum of the perspective that has captured our attention and energized us to move in response to that perspective.
Yeah. So
don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay. So this is potentially a revelation. So let me say it back to you because I feel like I'm understanding what you're saying. So let's, I would say in general we would say the scriptures are a good read, right?
Yeah.
Let's kind of agree on that. But what I hear you saying though, and I think this is really interesting because I haven't seen it this way. Let's say I read the book of Revelation, right? And I get into something and I get kind of wrapped around the axle on something, right? And I think about, my own study, right? I drill into all kinds of weird stuff, right? I can drill into weird stuff in the scriptures. I can drill
Yeah,
into weird stuff as it relates to aliens. I can drill into weird stuff in physics. And so, what I hear you saying, and this is really interesting because I think when we give authority to a book, we essentially provide it with authority over us. And we say, okay, let's say I read something and I shrink back in fear, right? Oh no, this seal is going to be opened, right? I immediately literally put myself underneath it. Now, whether that's true or not, whether that's foretelling something or not, what you're saying, I think, is that I'm reacting to something that hasn't been spoken by Jesus. It's something that I'm essentially bringing into the front of my mind through study, right? So I'm literally saying, okay, what does this mean? Okay, there's going to be a mark of the beast that you can't buy and sell. And what I hear you saying is, I guess, and this is a pretty bold way to say it, what you're reading isn't always what Jesus is saying.
exactly.
And that if I'm reading this, I'm making the assumption that I know better than he knows because I'm reading the book. And what that illustrates, in my opinion, is that I put the book as the authority over me versus him.
Yes.
And what the revelation, if you will, in the revelation is, what does he say? We're not to have any fear. So if he has seen us in the heavenlies, then this is the answer to everything. I hate to say it like that simply, but in a way, I think you're right. The transition would be, okay, the scriptures will be used in context. They will be used to reinforce. They will be useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. They will be very useful.
Yes.
But the spoken word of Jesus to you, sitting in the heavenly places, seated with him from his perspective, will be the revelation and direction of proaction. You're
Yes.
not going your own way. You're listening to, what do you want me to do? So, case in point, I'm not the leader of the free world,
Right.
but I have an influence over my family.
Yes.
And what's amazing about this is I may not dictate policy in the Middle East, but I do have a role to play in the peace of my home. You see what I'm
Yes.
saying? Like, I'm
I
like,
do.
in a way, it's like, what authority do I have? And Jesus is interested and willing to speak into the authority I have over my home and the peace
Yes.
of that, right? Like, in a way, they're really not different things. They're just at a different level, I think, in the world, we see it differently, but in a way, it's all the same thing. So we could bring anything to him, and he may actually utilize the scriptures themselves to help us understand something or help provide perspective or color commentary. But at the end of the day, what it sounds like is we're taking in a way, manufacturing this fear and putting ourselves in a position of, coming underneath it. That is having authority over us versus Jesus having authority over us and him directing our path because he's the strategic one. And I almost feel like if I were to shift my thinking there, rather than going to the scriptures to quote unquote study, I would go to him first and say, all right, what do you have? What proactive thing are we doing next?
Yep.
And then there may be things in the scripture to go, oh yeah, remember this thing? Versus the other way around. Because I feel like the
Yes.
other way around, I'm coming to the scriptures going, how do I construct my life in light of this? Oh, I'm scared. Well, yeah, I'm reacting to it. Is that right?
You bullseyed it. We have been trained to put something between us and Jesus
Yeah.
when the Father himself said, "My son has no equivalent. Listen to
To
him."
him. Yeah. Wow.
So
Wow.
how does the religious construct, the spirit of religion, the spirit of the church get around that? By getting us to name the scriptures as the word of God.
Mm,
And once they become the word of God, they become the equivalent of God and therefore are justified. We are justified in submitting ourselves as well as requiring others to submit themselves to the authority of the Bible.
this is
And what we
amazing.
have, it is incredibly clever. I mean, that's why it's called deception.
What's amazing about it is I keep coming back, and we've talked about this before, right? I've
Yeah.
examined this before, but it's just becoming more and more apparent that, wow, it's called a testament. And I think it's interesting when you look at the kind of the words. I think about this, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I think about the practices prior to the printing press, right?
Yeah.
Prior to us just having it on our phone. I think about this. I'm like, well, what did they do? Well, they kind of got together and they had this dinner and they said, hey, remember when we were called out of Egypt? Right. And then they eat certain things and talk about certain things. And it's this remembrance of something. Well, what was that? And I'm always reminded of what is a testament. And I think about this. I was like, hey, Steve, can I tell you this awesome story of what God did for me back on September 10th of 2000? And you're like, yes, you can. Well, I'm not writing scripture out. I'm telling my friend Steve, "Hey, look at what a miraculous thing I saw the Lord do in my life." It's not
Yeah.
written down. I didn't write a letter to the Philippians. I literally am just testifying to the power and work of God in my life. I don't put it in a book and demand that you read it. But it's a past tense thing for me. It's like, "Hey, I want to testify how great he is." And I think about, kind of what is the reflection of that worship that I would have and that love that I would have to say, "Wow, okay, I don't have this all figured out and you've come to my aid." I almost look at that now, like the Bible's that to say, "Hey, people throughout history are reaching across time to say, "Hey, look how good he is.
Yes.
Look what happened here." And what I think is amazing, what you're pointing out, which is tremendously jarring to people within the church, is that you've been told so many times that this is the word of God, that it precedes the spoken word of God. And it's in a way we've taken the thing to say, well, that's my whole case of why I'm so frustrated, I feel like, is because I go to church and I feel like he's only alive on Easter Sunday. He's not alive right now and speaking. And it's such a powerful idea to say, hold on, what a clever way. Convince the people he's dead
Yeah.
and make them come up underneath the authority of a scary text.
Well, what I would offer, Matt, what is more sinister is to say that he is alive, but that living being doesn't have any interest in talking to you. He
Yeah.
points you to a book.
Or he's mad at you, or he's really unhappy with you.
He's constantly pissed off at you,
Right. That's what's
and yet we
presented.
call him love.
Mm,
So what we just described is confusion. And what the confusing part, the element and the target of confusion is not to diminish the scriptures. It is to accept the scriptures in their proper place and role. To move them away from their proper place and role is to diminish them. See, it's not the other way around.
mm.
It's, if something is called if you say, if I bought into the perspective that the scriptures are the word of God, guess what I have then obligated myself to do? If
You're
we
under.
strip it all away,
Yeah.
to do exactly what the word of God says to do.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I do not know one person who does that.
I
Not
love
one.
it. Yeah, you're right. I love this. Carter's comment is just perfect. Isn't it interesting that we read a book about people hearing the voice of God who didn't have a book? That is so perfectly presented. I
Yep.
mean, it is so true. You think about that. And of course, that's the thing that I'm so enamored with. And I feel like if I were to boil down what's the reason I met you, Steve, and what's the like number one benefit I've gotten from you, it's to literally it's this idea, right? He's not dead, he's alive, he speaks, and that love, the interest, if you will, is unimaginably deep
And it is supreme.
and supreme.
It has no subordinate. I mean, it is not subordinate to anything except the Father himself. Okay? And so when he speaks, the Father says, listen to him. Well, what am I going to do? Am I going to now start debating with the Father, who has said on more than one occasion to listen to him?
Right, right.
Well, what have I been manipulated into actually doing? I've been manipulated in the name of righteousness to stand before God and say, nope, I'm not buying into what you're selling. You said to listen to Jesus alone. I said, nope, I need to listen to something else. I need to put myself under the authority of something else. Woman, folks, hold on. Let's back up. What in the world have we been manipulated into doing?
Yeah.
How did, wow, Jesus, I need to understand how that works. Book of Revelation. It says exactly what that revelation was about. It is a revelation of Jesus Christ. That's what it tells you its purpose right in the first paragraph. Right? Okay. So if that's what it is, how in the world did I get manipulated into thinking this is a book about a bunch of events that occur, all of which I get my ass kicked?
Right.
How does that work? And I'm being a little blunt and bold in this for the very specific purpose of saying that is exactly what's happening. So you watch boxing, and the guy that gets knocked out, does he say, "Oh, I got my fanny handed to me"? If you look at a sports engagement and somebody just wipes the floor with a team, does he say, "Oh yeah, we just got beat"? No, they speak in very demonstrative terms that, through the use of our particular language, emphasizes the depth and severity of the butt whooping.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happened. In the book of Revelation, we're told that this whole period of time that we call the tribulation is about us getting our butt whooped. No, hold on, back off.
Mm.
This book is about the revelation of Jesus Christ. And the first revelation is what he looks like to the creation. One with white hair, glowing eyes. I mean, this dude is a bad dude.
He's a bad man.
See, the creation does not mess with this man.
Oh, that's the truth. They recognize him.
They know exactly who he is. He has eyes of flame that penetrate right through. This is one bad dude. Now, to whom? To those who oppose him.
Yeah.
To those who attempt to stand in the way of him executing his Father's plan. That is the picture of the ultimate ruler, who neutralizes, subdues, and expels everything that is contrary or that opposes or that jeopardizes his Father's plan. That's what he's doing. That's who this guy is.
Well, and you see that in the garden, and you see that right when they're going to take hold of him. And what was it, Peter, that lops off the ear of the guard?
Yeah.
Which is such a, what's that?
Malchus. Yeah.
And to think that, I mean, what a crazy, I mean, literally the ear that hears gets lopped off, and it's interesting to think that, what are you doing getting in the way of my Father's plan, right? Even the talk of remove this cup from me, this discussion about what is the plan and how are we going to fulfill this plan. What's amazing, Steve, is, these things kind of build on themselves, right? You start seeing things and they keep building on themselves, and you're like, okay, wow. So now I'm gonna bring it to like real practical to today,
Okay.
So, I'm really interested in this flurry of activity that's happening on disclosure. And what I think is amazing is, it's funny. My wife wants to have no conversations about this whatsoever, because it's threatening to, that things would change. And, I went from being a kid, really interested in space and interested in all this kind of stuff. And then here we are, I had, years where people would say, "Hey, what do you think things are going to look like in the future?" I'm like, "Well, we're going to discover a new energy source, and we're going to recognize that we're not alone." Oh, ha ha ha, laughing, right? and now we got people in front of Congress. I mean, we have a form of disclosure already that says, hey, but all of this reinforces everything that I would say I've read in the scriptures as well. Like, none of it's a surprise to me. But I think what's really amazing about this time is that when things get difficult, right, and you don't know which way is up, I feel like, in a way, what we're pointed to is somewhat anemic. Like, you're pointed to try to figure out this revelation that John had on the island of Patmos. It's like, no, 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 no. Why don't you ask the guy who told him that?
Yes.
You know what I
Right
mean? And I
on.
think that's
Right on.
the big shift here. It's like,
Yep.
hold on, he was not any different than you, right? Why don't you ask him yourself? And I think it's really cool. Like, all of these things build on each other. Like Paul, right? He's on the road to Damascus. He's doing, all kinds of things against, the people who believe. And what ends up happening? He literally hears the voice. And of course, it's such a significant, event, obviously blinds him and is a transformation. And I think about that idea is like that, we talk about it, but we can't make Jesus speak to someone. You have to be interested in it. And in a way, we're kind of talking around the concept, which is, wow. So I've replaced an alternative. Remember in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we
Yeah.
see that opening scene, and we see Indiana Jones right at the very beginning. There's this idol, and it's gold, and it's sitting on this pedestal, and he literally has this bag of sand, and he's like trying to estimate the weight of this golden idol because he's going to take it and replace it with something else. And what I feel like has happened is that's like the scriptures. Like, the church has basically said to us, I'm going to take the real thing, I'm going to replace it with this thing, and this thing is going to be very confusing to you. It's helpful, but it's really just speaking to the original. And the original is the testament of the spoken word. Why would we get together at the Passover and talk about coming out of Egypt? But to remind ourselves how good he is.
Yeah.
And, I think that that's the thing that's really interesting is, for me, this is a revelation of accessibility.
Yes.
It's like, wow, so I can go to him. But what's funny is that's what he said the whole time.
He's saying it the whole time, and that's how he's acted. He's not only said it, that's how he's behaved.
Wow.
I mean, listen, Adam and Eve do their deed. They're now they now offer something of blessing back to Jehovah. Abel's is accepted, Cain's isn't, and Jehovah has a conversation with Cain. Now, wait a minute. Cain just presented an offering that was unacceptable.
Wow.
He's contemplating in his mind the removal of the thing that convicts him, which is his brother. And Jehovah has a conversation with him. Well, Lord, did you stop there?
Yeah, good question.
Is that where you ended the conversation?
Wow.
No. The whole book that we collect, and that's as part of Carter's deal in his comment, the whole book that we claim is and rename the Word of God is about God speaking to his people.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, not only speaking to his people, but to speaking to some who weren't his people in that strict construct. See? I mean, if he wants to speak, he'll speak, and he'll speak in the language that they understand, even if it means writing it on a wall in a language that nobody knows, but he's got a guy on board who can interpret that thing.
It's a hand. Just a hand, not an arm.
Yep.
It's well, and you think about the length, you think about how impactful that would be. I mean, just imagine.
Yeah. Oh,
you've been sitting there drinking and having a party, and like literally a hand appears. But that's actually what we're seeing today,
Yeah.
right? We're seeing all of these supernatural things that we would describe as magical, interdimensional. There's all the kind of the scientific approach of this. But when I look at the historic, you know, perspective. So for example, yesterday or the day before, this new military video got released, and it was leaked out to Jeremy Corbell, and it's what's called the jellyfish UAP. Some people
Hmm.
call it the chandelier, and it's weird, right? And everybody's trying to debunk it or say that it's real or not, but it's pretty weird. It's really weird, actually. And this is a targeting pod from a Black Hawk, and it sees this thing and it follows it. And this thing has been seen many times in many different contexts. And it's just, there's no place to put it in your mind. I mean, it
Yeah.
looks like one of the, Star Wars drones that look like they had the legs hanging off of them. That's what it looks like.
Hmm.
But it's not mechanical, it's organic looking. And it's like, okay, this thing is real. This is weird. Well, guess what? I was watching this thing and they said, hey, look at this fresco from 1000 AD that was painted on the wall of the crucifixion of Christ. And what's in the background? But two jellyfish things floating in the sky.
Hmm.
Like it's like so odd, right? Like, hold on. Like this was painted 1,000 years ago, and here we are seeing these jellyfish-like things. Well, I think what's really amazing is we're coming into an interesting time because of the nature of technology and communication. And I think it's, it all fits together in the sense of what is disclosure except light being shined on something, that the truth would be exposed, and that there are forces and people that are aligned with forces who are trying to say, shut up, don't look here. No, we don't want this to be exposed. And there's all sorts of reasons why they wouldn't want this exposed, because there's all kinds of liability. And this, I think, is so important. I've talked to you about this privately. Like, why now? Why this
Yeah.
now? And there's so much more to this than just like, hey, Elohim, oh, the Bible, Word of God. No, like there's something really, really significant here, which is to say, what if you asked him yourself? What would be the implications? And I think that this is the thing I would say to anyone that's been the revelation over the year for me. You say, and I've said it many times, that he is omnipresent, omnipotent, all knowing, all seeing, the all in all. He is everything, infinite intelligence, infinite wisdom, infinite love, infinite everything. Access, there's nothing that gets by him. But I decided to go to something that was translated 15 times and sits on my shelf and call it God. In a way, I might as well just build a golden calf or a log of an idol. I might as well just put something up and worship something, because right now it may not be wood, but it's paper. It's about the same thing. And I almost feel like what it's saying to me is it's useful. It is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. But it's also something that reveals to us how it's all built. And it's strange how it repeats itself so many times in different ways to share with you, hey, you didn't get it the other 58 times. I'll tell you again. So you're going to eat with the pigs, and I'm going to finance that, and you're going to come back and you're going to understand the nature and character of your father. Then I'm going to give you the ring.
Yeah.
And you go, wow. So you're really, and that's what I think is so incredible to me, is you're saying, don't get yourself caught up in reacting to things. Listen to me and let's get to work.
There you go.
Because that's the
That,
primary stuff, right? Like, all right, what do you want me to do? And it could be as simple as, hey, your daughter's struggling, or your wife needs this, or there are some things that you really need to tend here. He's not just focused on, you know, he's not just focused on the rapture. You know what I mean? That's the thing I think with the church, we're so wound up in it, is like as if he's preoccupied with that. Well, no, I see that he cares about the stuff like right in front of me at home.
well, think about this for a minute. If we're going to be raptured out, what does that say about us?
Yeah.
Now, what we're told is that what that says about us is that we are among the saved, among the elect. Well, wait a minute. Weren't all of the the pictures throughout the scriptures of the heavenly court declaring the glory of God in the earth.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, so the glory of God, which is supposed to be us in the earth, he's going to take out?
Right. That makes sense.
Whoa, let's back up. Okay, let's take a little closer look at this thing. I'm not trying to advocate, nor am I trying to antagonize anything. I'm simply saying, hey, if we say that the scriptures are credible, what do they say? They say, listen to my son. Listen to him. Listen to him.
It doesn't say read about him.
No, doesn't say read about him. It says listen to him. Well, what does Jesus say? How does he say we're supposed to live? By every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Oh, what else does he say? You can't do one thing apart from me. Not one thing. Wow. Whatever it is that you do apart from me is eventually going to disintegrate.
Without me,
so it will be as if you did nothing. There will be no record of what you did. It will disintegrate. It will return to the dust from which it was created. So it's all there in plain sight, where you don't have to worry about attacking the scriptures. More so, you say, who is it that has already attacked the scriptures and manipulated them? Let's talk about that for just a second. The golden calf. Man will rail on the Israelites who built for themselves a golden calf and began to worship it. Well, what was the thing that was vile? The gold? Well, gosh, we're seeking for gold all the time. We're talking about the value of gold all the time as the primary source of money.
Yep.
Different subject, but see, has a noble purpose is the point. If you look into electronic materials, gold has a tremendous role to play in that. See, so it is a useful tool. Well, how about the calf? Something wrong with the calf? Did the calf say, hey man, I'll volunteer to be the idol? You know, but what? No. The calf has a useful role. See, it provides nourishment to those who need nourishment. As it grows, it can, if it's a female, it can produce milk. It can produce all kinds of things. See, the calf has a valuable purpose and role in life. So what was the problem? The perversion of what was good to make it evil without them knowing it. Well, can that not happen to this record that has been written, that where generation after generation is telling about and documenting the profound things that God is doing? Well, now we're into our strategic conversations of multiple episodes. If you think strategically about this, okay, what was the strategic intention and purpose behind creating the golden calf? What was the strategic purpose of calling this collection the Word of God? What is the strategic purpose about putting us under the authority of that written document when the Father himself said, you only have one authority, and that's my son, listen to him? What's going on here? See, we're living in the place of contradiction while calling it clarity.
Yeah.
And no, it's not. That's not what's happening. And once Jesus brings you to that aha, and you start stepping back, and what you find him doing, which is again this practical, since we're on kind of a practical theme here today, is he says, go ahead, push it, probe it, challenge it. See what it does when you challenge it. When you take that and challenge, when you take that thing that is a perversion and you prod it, you push it, you challenge it, what does it do back? Does it launch back at you, or does it say, come on, keep coming, come on, keep probing, keep going, come on, you're getting there. Our John 3:16 thing.
Yeah.
We didn't rewrite anything. We just said, hey, the definitions are there. What's going on with the definitions? See? If you can probe it, then hey, okay, it's all right. If when you probe it, it launches back out at you, you go, oh, wait a minute, why are you doing that? Okay? This is the practical way that you learn to live as you learn to have your senses trained to discern between good and evil, between the lookalikes. See, they look identical on the surface, but when you probe them, they have very different responses. One invites you to continue to probe. The other says, no, don't. You probe again, I'm going to cut your hand off. And if you don't stop after I cut your hand off, we're going to keep going.
Okay, I got one for you.
Okay.
I got one for you. This is so big. This is so great, Steve. So here we go. Okay. This is like perfect illustration of this. So resistance, I've been seeing you in the chat, and so I'm with you. And also just recognizing my father passed, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. So I searched it. So watch this. Yeah. This is what you've taught me. I'm gonna practice what you've taught me, Steve. Here we go. You ready for this one?
Practical. Yeah.
I love this one. Here we go. Okay. So I've heard that verse many, many times, right? Okay. So here we are. Let me go back just because this is what I did. And this is, I think, is one of the greatest things you've taught me. Okay. So here I am, Matthew 24:35, right? I typically have been reading the NIV. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Is that really what it says? Okay, let's take a look. Heaven and earth. Let's look at this. Will pass away, right? That's the translation that I've heard all my life. What does this say? To come near or aside, to approach, go by. Now, perish and neglect is there, right? What's amazing to me is I never once until this very moment realized, what does it mean? What if this said, based on Strong's, what if it said, heaven and earth will come near and approach, but my words never pass away? Well, what does pass away? To come near or aside, right? I mean, yeah. It's so interesting. These words are the same. Well, no, they're not the same. They're not the same. They're very similar. But it's interesting. I mean, you could say heaven and earth will come near, but my words will also come near. It's interesting. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, but this idea is basically these two words are defined very, very similarly, but I never ever knew or would have ever considered the idea of to come near or aside, to approach, to go by. Now, we often, obviously, that's pretty definitive language saying it will pass away. Well, I don't know that that's actually accurate. And so because I have confusion there, this is what I would do based on what we've talked about. Hey, Jesus, how do you see this?
Yes.
Right? So, okay, I look at this and it says, I've been taught all my life that heaven and earth will pass away. Well, that means it's going away. Well, how can it be the glory in the earth if it's going to pass away? I'm confused. So I go into this and I look further and I go, well, no, it means potentially to approach or to come near. Hold on. So heaven and earth will come near to each other, and so will my voice, my word. Hold on a second. I'm not saying I'm right, Steve, but I could translate that this way. Heaven and earth will become one, and I will become one with heaven and earth. That's a potential. You could have defined that same thing, and it's a completely different meaning. That these things are going to come together with me, and we are all going to become one. My word, my earth, and my heaven, all one. because they approach and get close, not perish and melt away and dissolve and whoosh, they're gone.
Okay. Now, the next thing, when you go back and you say, okay, Jesus, what is this? How are you seeing this?
Yeah. And that's the thing
Why
I
are
think.
why are there these contradictory words in here? These contradictory meanings in this. What is going on here? If you come near, if something comes near, is that causing something else to perish, to be averted, to be,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
whoa, what is that? Well, Steve, what do you think a new heaven and a new earth is? Haven't I told you from the beginning that heaven and earth are not separated? They are two parts of the same portion of my creation.
They will look new.
What will make them new?
The combining of the two.
Bringing them to they're restoring them to their original design and purpose. What is it that produces that? When you learn to rule in my nature and character, and what is causing it to perish is expelled, is neutralized. Oh my goodness, have you just quoted John 3:16?
Mm-hmm.
For God so loved the cosmos, the very thing that he created to administer his creation, that he gave his only one of a class sons, that whoever believes in that, the destruction that is inherent within it will be removed. And you will enter into a new age of life.
Wow.
Whoa. See? Now, it's fascinating that this is happening because, and I met this gal through Carter, interestingly enough, again, and she asked me a question, based on, I think it was episode 35, about the Greek and the Hebrew and the lexicons and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I asked her, I haven't been able to get back to her, but I simply gave her a question. Her name is Diane, sweet gal. She's one of those Jesus only, Jesus alone kind of, seekers. And I asked her the question that I asked, many people, because this is the question Jesus asked me. Were the writers of the scriptures, did they have PhDs in their respective languages? Well, how about the people? So did Jeremiah have a PhD in Hebrew?
Right.
Okay, what about the readers? What about John? Did he have a PhD in Greek? Now, why is that important? Because what do lawyers do to exclude the rest of the people so that the people who need legal help must come to them and be subject to their will?
Put it in legalese so you don't understand it.
That's right. Create their own language.
Yeah.
What about doctors?
Yeah, same thing.
What do they do to exclude the average person? They create their own language. And so that's what's happened, if you will, in the, with the scriptures, is that it has been reduced to a technical document that only those who understand the language at the technical level can understand it. So the rest of us are subject to their interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what Jesus decided it was time to do during our time? To bring together all of these tools that he has been creating and producing over the last couple hundred years, to give us the ability to, in a millisecond, decide if what we have heard is an accurate rendering of what was spoken. And instantly, just guess what? The last two times you pulled that up, and twice in a row now, you've looked at that and said, wait a minute, that's not a fair rendering. Okay, Jesus, what is a fair rendering of that?
Yeah.
You have taught us to pursue you for your message and meaning, because that's a parable to me. You have two different words or definitions have what appeared to be contradictory meanings. Huh. What did you have in mind when you had Matthew write those words?
You know what strikes
Well,
me? You know, strikes me like significantly right now. You know, we've talked many times about the structure of how we learn just in general in the Western world, right? Someone stands up front and everybody shuts up. And of course, you get into different schools of thought where you can engage with people in discussion, right? And what is that? What method is that? That's the Socratic, whatever the one where we dialogue, right? And what's interesting about this as it relates to the church today is I was thinking about this, this idea of anemic or, something that has been sanitized or sterilized or, rendered ineffective. Is that if we look at the result of the fracturing of there's like a zillion denominations, right? And you think about this, what are you following when you go there? Well, I'm not going anywhere that they don't have flames on their van, or you got to have a piano here, or where's your cross? Well, I don't do anything that doesn't have people that are speaking in tongues or whatever, right? You this fractioning, right? It's
yeah,
the fractures and fractures and fractures and fractures. And what is that built upon? We have the corner on the truth. We have the right interpretation. And what's really interesting, man, I've always felt this way. And of course, I came to this whole thing at 28. I didn't come to this as like, I didn't grow up in the church. And I think it gives me a pretty unique perspective because I kind of thought it was a bunch of hooey for a long time. What's interesting to me is I imagined a scenario, right? I imagined a group of people, right? Let's call it a gathering. Let's not even call it a church. And let's say that message is one that says, hey, um, the authority is Jesus. He's alive and he speaks. The scriptures are very useful and we will study them. But as we study them, we're going to ask him what he means by it. But we here at this gathering are concerned about the proactive nature of what Jesus is doing in the world. And so I encourage you, and I encourage myself, to seek direction from him in his voice. That our authority is the spoken words of Jesus in your life. And what's crazy about that is he exposes everything. And I've seen this happen time and time and time and time again. As I go to him with things, he doesn't always tell me what I want to hear.
yeah.
And in many cases, actually shows me in a very gentle way that I was wrong all along. What's amazing, though, about that is I think about the capabilities of God's man that are sitting in our group, whether they're in chairs or pews or whatever. And I look at them and I look and I go, wow, what has God designed for Steve Staggs? What has God designed for Carter Hill? What has God designed for you? And you go, what if not only we were talking to the living Jesus about these things and getting insight, but what if we were talking to each other about what he's saying? And I don't mean, and this is the thing that I feel like has gotten so fractured. I have been so turned off by people acting as if they know what God is saying. And the evidence of it is that they just keep on babbling it. And it's for selfish ambition. And you can see right through it. But then when things are true and I have this like constant conversation, I know what's true and what's not. And I seek him in that. What is amazing is I almost feel like there's an intentional barrier between the people that are sitting there shutting up and listening. That if actually, in fact, we were facilitating and reminding that Jesus is alive and he speaks, that people would look across from each other and say, we're not worshiping this dude up front who's talking. Because right now, I feel like what we're doing is we're saying, oh, he's a good speaker and he's funny, makes me laugh. Oh, the music's great. No, but I go, hold on, so the creator of the universe is alive and he speaks. It's all created for him and by him. And this is what's going on with me. What's going on with you? Well, he said to me to unlock global generosity. I have no idea how to get that done. Well, we praise him for what he's about to do. All right. Well, he's proactive. What does he want you to do next? Well, you better get home. Your daughter's been in a crash. That has nothing to do with unblocking global generosity that I know of. But what's so beautiful about that is it almost takes the weight off of your shoulders to think that I have to act a certain way in the context of what this guy up front believes or whatever this denomination believes is more to say, no, the richness of this isn't that because I don't experience this and I don't see this from you either. Hey, Matt, the Lord told me to tell you something last night. Well, I kind of the impression that if he wants me to know something, he might tell me himself. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't speak through you and he wouldn't do that, but every time you've ever said anything to me, you said, "Hey, why don't you ask him?" And I feel like that is the fundamental thing that we're talking about here that no one can argue with. Because if they argued with it, this is what they would say: "No, do not listen to Jesus, listen to me." Because you can't be trusted with Jesus. He's too big, too powerful. You need me in the middle to help you understand what he said. And he said, no, 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 that's not actually what it says. And you think about that. Well, what, this transfer, whatever this means, I almost feel like the effectiveness of God's people, it needs to be facilitated in a different way. Because
Yeah.
if in fact you had people promoting this idea that, no, 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 just like he said, you're not worshiping on this mountain. No, it's in spirit and truth. It's for you to listen to. This is my son. Listen to him. What does that look like? And that's what you're doing for me. You're saying, "Hey, man, yeah, at the beginning, yeah, kind of things come this way." I've learned stuff from him through watching movies. I've learned things through. I woke up and literally had a download. I woke up and knew something. I was like, "I know
Yeah.
kung fu," and I'm like, "What?" And you go, but then it's like shepherding that too. Like, "Well, Matt, you're a little out of time here. You're a little ahead of me." Like, hold on a second. I'm like, "Okay, so this is a journey with you." And you think about what are the implications of that? I think it's unifying. I don't think it's fracturing.
Oh my goodness. You have just laid out about a half a dozen key strategic, um, I'm going to put it in the terms of gamesmanship that have been played against us, stratagems that have been exercised and implemented against us to cause us to become exactly the opposite of what we are seeking. I mean, think about this for a minute. Just pause and without throwing any stones, just asking questions. Okay, Christianity is billed as the only true religion. Now, the people who believe that, I was one, believe that with all of my heart, honestly, with integrity, because I believed it was the very gift that God had given to us, that we are Christians and
Mhm.
we are the light of the world that God has put in place. Okay, fair enough. Without going to the Bible yet, just looking at, okay, then if we are the light of the world, what is the light that we are sending to the world? Well, at last count that there are about 60,000 different views on what that light looks like. And
Yeah.
every one of those views says they're the truth. Wow, Jesus, is that what you had in mind? Is that what you were thinking about?
Huh.
That there would be, as of this date, about 60,000 different views of what that light looks like. And what does now that light do with the other portions that are claiming to be light? Well, each of those lights pretty much says that the other forms of those who are claiming to be light are not only wrong, but their error, their deception, and their the lie. Well, wait a minute, I thought you said you were the light. Whoa, Jesus, something has gone haywire here. What is it that has gone haywire? Well, Steve, where did you get the idea of associating yourself as a Christian, of declaring yourself to be a Christian? Where did that come from? You see what begins to happen? When you learn, you don't approach things from a standpoint of accusation. You start approaching things from the standpoint of inquiry. Something isn't right here. Now, by way of example, one of the Old Testament, what we call Old Testament stories, was when Samuel, who was the last of the prophets to rule Israel, the people started to cry out for a king, like the other nations around them had. They weren't satisfied with, with Jehovah being their king. They wanted a man to be their king. And so Samuel was really bummed out about that. And there was a lot of stuff that Jehovah said, but part of the conversation was, first of all, Samuel, you have to realize they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other thing you need to realize. The people do not reflect the king. The king reflects the people. So when you see a Bill Clinton, you see the people who have said, that's who I want. When you see a George Bush, in our country in particular, when you see a Barack Obama, when you see a Donald Trump, when you see a Joe Biden, the people are not a reflection of them. They are a reflection of the people. So now let's go back at this practical part that you and I have talked about a lot of times. Why is it important that I learn to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God? Because when I remove the barriers between him and I, and then start learning how to rule my life with him, and then from my life to the life of my family, and then from the life of my family to the life of my relationships and my work, it becomes like that parable that Jesus said about the leaven that leavens the whole lump of dough. It begins to spread and permeate. And what begins to then happen? The leaders will then start reflecting the people.
Mm.
What will happen to all the systems that are then being operated by those leaders? They will start changing the dynamic of how they are operated and the intention for which they are operated. No longer does it become, when our life becomes in alignment with him, in this unbroken relationship, where I learn to live by every word that proceeds out of his mouth, where I learn how to hear his voice, when I learn how to sit with him in heavenly places, when I learn how not to react to it, to proact, when I learn to live the way he designed life to be lived, then all of a sudden, all of these instruments and tools that are designed to help us are no longer there to exploit us and to extract and enslave us. They then become instruments of service for us. That's how it's designed to work. So hey, I don't know about you, I want to learn how to do that.
You know what? So, you've said it many times. There's a simplicity to it, though, that is really, really kind of refreshing. And I think about this, it's like, when I started, I came in at 28, right? And I learned all the rules, right? How do you act? What do you do? All that kind of stuff. And what did I see? A bunch of kings. And it's really interesting when I think about everyone that I know that's kind of, full-time ministry. And it's really interesting. So my parents, later in my life, after I was out of college, started going to a Presbyterian church in Michigan. And my mother had grown up in a, you know, Christian home and kind of known that, but there was this whole hippie thing that happened, and my dad
Mhm.
had no interest in that stuff, right? And so I didn't grow up in the church, had some interactions with it and such, but it's just really it's really, really interesting to me how this the way in which we kind of taught this to be is that you need to go and learn this other language, right? It's almost like what you said with the doctors and the lawyers. These guys need to come in here and they're going to go through all of this training and they're going to be um, ordained. I mean, this
Yeah.
concept of we're going to ordain you, we're going to give you permission because we think you're qualified to tell everybody. And then we use the term like, yeah, I got to go to church to get fed. I'm like, I want to vomit whatever you feed me because this is the wrong context. And you think about this, we've perpetuated kingship of Saul. Like this is really what I'm seeing is literally a say, no, he needs to be tall and handsome. Guess what? They mostly are. So I remember going back to so I was with I think uh, somebody who was passing away, and this pastor came into the room, and this was my parents' pastor, and he was different. I'm like, this guy's different. And of course, I had gone to their church, and I'm like, why is this guy so different? And I'm like, this isn't like what I've seen before from the pastors I'm used to, and especially down here in Texas, right? Down here in Texas, they got like frosted tips and they're like, you know, doing everything to act like they're like cool and a part of the hip culture or whatever. And I'm like, this guy was as meek and as mild and as sweet and kind. And, he was providing a function that was really good. But even in that, I saw we've lumped upon the ministry so many tasks of service that are we've outsourced to leadership or we've outsourced to the king. And my wife's got a good friend whose husband is a pastor in a pretty liberal church, and he literally is like, I said, so why'd you get into the ministry? And he said, you know what? There's a lot of different things. It was as if he went to like career night. And he's like, well, I like to speak and I like people. And, I like to help folks. Well, you should be a pastor. And that's what he did. That was it. But the framework of that with 60,000 different options is the fact that you can have your own little fiefdom. You could be a little king. And so we've created these scenarios in which we say, well, it's got economics, it's going to provide for you money, and you'll do the weddings and the funerals, and lead this deal and build an extra wing on the building and have some lemonade and some cookies and continue this thing that is culturally acceptable. And what it feels like is, hold on a second. Well, no wonder we're lukewarm and he'd spit us out of his mouth. No wonder. No wonder it's anemic. Is because we're perpetuating a cultural thing and really have lost sight of the fact that, hold on, I have put something in between me and the one who speaks. And, it's interesting. I'm curious. Leadership's important, right? I mean, leadership's important. And I do think that you're providing that leadership to me, Steve, right? You're not like lording it over me, but it does really help to have someone who's gone through it before. So what is the picture of quote unquote the ecclesia in the future that is more ideal? Obviously, it's one who recognizes that Jesus is alive and he speaks, but there's also very practical of what you do for me and what we do here is you're open to having a discussion. You're not offended by my questions. And every time you get, hey, I'll give you my perspective, but you go ask him yourself. It's like as simple, refreshing, fundamental, but it seems like the way it should be. And actually, those that would encounter it, no matter what they bring to the table, it would be unifying versus fracturing.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's first talk about the ecclesia. Okay, what the word actually means. By the way, Jesus is the one who said that. You know, my ecclesia, I'm going to build my ecclesia. And by the way it's been perverted, I'm going to build my ecclesia on the very thing that, Peter, you have described to me, which was not of flesh and blood. Remember, the whole discussion was, who do people say that I am? And they rattle off a bunch of dead guys. You know, and then he said, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. He said, and Jesus' answer was, flesh and blood. There is no faculty, human faculty at work that revealed that to you, that produced that realization. But it was revealed to you by my Father. And so he said, I call you, you know, and so what I do is I now am going to describe for you, Peter, how this works. It's on that rock. What rock? Rock of a man? Actually, the rock means is a little pebble. You know, it's on this rock that I'm going to build my ecclesia. What rock is that? It's the rock of revelation. It's the rock where the Father reveals to you things that come out of your conversation and dialogue. Now, Peter didn't recognize that he was in conversation, but Jesus asked the question, and guess what the answer was? That's dialogue.
Yeah.
Okay? That's living by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. When words come out of our mouths, what do we call that? Conversation. We're having conversation. Words are coming out of our mouths. We're conversing. And so the Father was right there in the middle. Because why? Because the Son can do nothing apart from the Father. Jesus says, I don't speak anything except the Father speaks. I don't work unless I see him working. I don't go anywhere unless he sends me. So who was right in the middle of that conversation? The Father. And he spoke to Peter, and Peter says, oh man, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, that's the rock I'm going to build my ecclesia on. Those who have come out from where they are in the life they're living and the means by which they're living and coming to me. That's what ecclesia means. It's an assembly that has come out from one thing and going to another. And he said, the gates of the place, the gates of the residence of the dead will not prevail against my ecclesia. Those who have learned to converse with me. Okay, now, what does that have to do? So now, what does that have? How does that then relate to this training aspect that you were talking about? Well, you know, we know how to train people. That's not a mystery. That's part of the cosmos that God has created. And so what happens? A baby comes up. We've talked many times about the baby, the child. Well, the parent knows how to train. Do they know how to train because they can write a curriculum? No, it's inherent within them. Even though they are terrified, you know, and scared to death that they're going to screw it up sometimes, guess what they end up doing? They end up training the child how to do the things they need to do.
Snatching the kid out of traffic.
That's right. There are things that we know how to do. And then we say, okay, we're going to institutionalize this a little bit to be more efficient. So we send them to school.
Well, we need a method. We need a method.
Right? Well, my point is that we know how to create tools of training. We know how to train. We know how to identify those who are especially gifted in training. We know how to set up institutions for training. We know how to do all of these things, but what do we ultimately do when the training is done? Don't we send them out into the world and say, go do your deal? Every place where training exists, that's the outcome, is to send them out into the world to exercise the skill that they have developed over their years of training. except one, the church.
Wow.
The church does not send people out and say, okay, you have spent all the time that you need to spend here. We've trained you in everything that we can train you. Now it's your turn to go out and learn to exercise the things that we've taught you, beginning with learning to listen to and live with Jesus. Now, go exercise that skill.
Well, and the practical too, we see, what did he say? Don't take anything with you. I think
Yeah,
it's really interesting. Like the very practical of this when he sent out the disciples too. He didn't say, "Hey, make sure you pack up the food and make sure you take with you, your sleeping bag and make sure you have a tent." And it's really interesting that I think what's amazing about this is the convention of Jesus. I know
yeah,
that's kind of weird to say that, but there's only really what 33 years of that convention. What is the convention? God becoming man.
yes,
Well, what is this point of this convention of him being practical and in the world? The implications of it, I mean, we've changed the very nature of how we measure time, but it also the significance of this is that it's a model. And I think that that's something that's really interesting, just you and me interacting like this, is that what is the convention of Jesus? And this idea that, what did the Father say about him? Well, he's the firstborn among, right? This whole idea that he is a model, and what is he modeling to you? Well, listen to what he said. I'll send one who will remind you of everything he said. And what did he say? I can't do anything apart from the Father. And you go, hold on a second. So it's really interesting. It's almost like I've been trying to tell you this for quite some time.
it's simple.
And I'm gonna like the length at which throughout, if you look at the Old Testament, right? The length at which he's gone to make the point. Okay, you didn't get that. It's almost like I'm in class, I almost imagine the teacher in class. He's like the kids are like staring like a deer in headlights. And he's like, I guess I'm gonna have to have the kid do this. All right, come over here and put your hand on this hot stove, kid. And you're like, oh, so this is what heat is like. And it feels a lot like that in some respects to say, and there's so much more wrapped up into it, but this is a model. And that's where I think the simplicity comes. It's like he's inviting us into this model. And here, what I'm so thankful is you're following that model. You're like, hey, what is this model? This is a model of, and that's why I think it's so refreshing, Steve, is because what did literally Jesus say to Satan himself? He said, no, man does not live on bread alone. And so what have you said to me? Matt, man does not live on bread alone. You can't get your bread from me.
Yeah,
You can get my perspective. I'll talk with you. I'll be your friend. I'll share with you my experience and all those things. But I think that that's the thing, and it's so weird to me that that has been covered because now when I see what you're talking about, that is real light of the world because the
well,
light emanates from directly versus
yeah,
indirectly.
yeah. That. Now let's go back to our strategic thing again. See, we can throw stones at the church. We can do this and we can do that, and we can line up good guys and bad guys, and we can do all of this other stuff. Or there's another approach. Wow, Jesus says the church is your body and your bride. Please don't be offended, but is this the best you can do over 2,000 years? And you're, now, again, please don't reduce me to dust here. This is an honest question. And now you want me to follow the rules that this church has described, who says that it's the light of the world, it's your bride and your body, and I'm to give myself entirely to that. If this is the best that you can do in 2,000 years, which, by the way, looks like we're going backwards, not frontwards, we're not making progress, we're actually going backwards on this deal. What in the world is eternity with you going to look like if this is the real deal?
Wow.
Because in 2,000 years, we're going in the wrong direction. Now, see, that's an honest question that within the construct of the church, and I've used that word construct about a half a dozen times because that's what it is. You're not even allowed to ask that question.
No.
See, you're not allowed, which tells you what? If you're not allowed to, what does that mean? It's not allowing you to probe it. There is something at work that is strategic. So then we look at, right?
That's what's happening right now in the censorship realm, right? It's really interesting, the strategic use of misinformation. So the World Economic Forum is meeting next week, and their number one topic is misinformation and disinformation. Well, they're a very strategic body internationally, or they see themselves as the global elite. And what is their concern? They're using strategically the means of censorship to get you to not probe it. If I can keep you and say these things are off limits, you can't ask these questions, you can't have these conversations. And what's really interesting is we're seeing it at a global scale right now, but we see it at the church level. I mean, we see this in a lot of different realms. It's not just within the church, but it is a strategic use of control.
Yes, it is the very objective of control. Okay, let's have some fun. Again, talking about what's in the scriptures. They're useful to give us some information. The ecclesia was gathering together more and more and more and consolidating. And then it says, and Jesus sent a persecution against, and the translation is church, against the church, against the believers, to scatter them. And it assigns the responsibility for that to Jesus himself. Okay, so we back up and we say, Jesus, why did you do that? I mean, what was it that you saw that was of such a danger? Now let's talk in terms of rule. What is the threat that you saw that put in jeopardy your plan? That was so severe that you had to send a persecution against those folks to scatter them. Why'd you do that? Well, Steve, where does the blood reside? Where does life reside? Excuse me, I said it wrong. Where does life reside? Of course, my answer was in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, don't these people consider and declare the value of my blood, that they are covered by the blood, that they are saved by the blood? My blood? Well, yes, Lord. Okay, if my life is in my blood that covers them and saves them, and they are washed clean by that blood, what happens when the blood stops moving? It coagulates. It clots. Said, Steve, I was simply breaking up a blood clot. That's not how it works. My blood flows. My life flows through the blood. If you're going to declare that you are under my blood must flow. So I sent what was necessary to break up the blood clot. Well, that is a concept that my brain could not configure in 10 billion tries, because my presumption was that the gathering was important. Oh, by the way, isn't that what it says in Hebrews? Do not neglect the assembling of yourselves together, which is the practice of some. Well, if they were simply gathering, no, they weren't gathering, they were consolidating. There's a difference between gathering and consolidating.
Yeah.
Okay? So these are the kind of things that, and we could name 1,000 of them in my own life experience, where I was taught one thing, and the moment I started saying, well, Jesus, how do you see that thing? He started dismantling that and then putting back in, recreating my mind to think the way that he thinks.
The one caveat to that is that it's it's in alignment with everything else.
That's exactly what it
Which
is.
which is true, right? See, that's the thing that I'm noticing about this is the dismantling is not for the purpose of dismantling. It's breaking the clot, right? The clot keeps it
Yeah.
from flowing, and in reality, what's happening is it's actually standing in between you and the truth, because once it's unclotted and flows, it resonates with all of the other pieces, and that's the thing that I've noticed about it. It's that
Yes.
how do I know if something is true? Why
Yeah.
is it refreshing? Why does it seem simple? Why does it have practical application? Why do I see fruit from this tree? And you know what? You
Well,
think about that, you're just like freedom, right? I mean,
it's
that's where the essence of that comes from.
where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, there's liberty. You're exactly right, Matt. I mean, shoot, we know from our from medicals from the standpoint of medical science that if the blood clots and that clot breaks up in the system, what does it do? It'll kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, first thing it does, it creates a stroke, and what does it do? It fries your brain, and you no longer can think like the healthy person thinks.
I just saw
Well,
some, I mean, you talk about getting into a massive rabbit hole. I won't go there completely, but there's all of this talk right now of all these people that are into longevity, right? The people who fear death the most, you know what they're
yeah,
doing? They're literally transfusing themselves with younger plasma. Like, this is a whole treatment. It's expensive as all get out, but they feel a lot better when they have young blood in them. And it's really interesting to think that life is in the blood, and this idea of, the blood has a really interesting role in the scriptures as well. This, what
yeah.
is the structure? What is the importance? What is the life? Where is it at? And it's interesting that those who, I would say, defy God or don't recognize him are trying to be like him by trying to preserve their own lives through the blood.
Well, see, the thing that I would offer is they know something is not right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They know something's not right, but they don't know what it is. So they search for the things that solve the problem that they can't get their head wrapped around. Something's not right here. What is the solution to this problem? And, you know, that's the dilemma that we are locked into when we try to figure this thing out on our own, because it was not, the creation was not designed for us to figure this out on our own. It just wasn't designed that way. And every place that you look that's operating apart from Jesus, even in the center of the very thing that claims to be his, his boys. Okay? You look in there and you go, man, something's not right there, dude. There's
Yeah.
60,000 of you. What? Something is not right. Does anybody have the courage to stand up and say, hey, something's not right? What we're doing is not right. It's not producing it. This is what it looks like for the kingdom of God to come to the earth where the will of God is operating. Man, we are in deep yogurt. We are in trouble. So does anybody out there got the courage to say, man, I don't know what it is, but let's maybe take him up on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. I think about the simple terms. Here we are in crypto, right? And right now is like perfect time because it's like we know the bottom's in, and we know that there's a lot of good things potentially to come with the growth of this in the next 2 years. We're staring, massive recession in the face, and that could have an impact to the very highs or the next all-time high, it could push things back a little bit. And I think a lot of people are kind of, reading the tea leaves, if you will, about what this financial future may look like. But I'll tell you what, man, it's interesting. We use the term the gospel. And I've told you many times that I've asked him, I'm like, hey, you want me to preach the gospel? Nope. And what I've realized is I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so let's not confuse onboarding with the gospel. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is the thing I've recognized here. People talk all the time about onboarding into the pulse chain or into Hex or whatever it is. What does that look like? And of course, most people, I often talk about the fact that, well, you're not going to be able to onboard somebody unless you know what's a benefit to them. You got to understand people before you start talking. And that's just a good fundamental sales strategy as well. But then I think about this whole thing, right? This whole thing of what is the gospel, right? And I think about good news, right? Well, is it good news for everybody, right? What does that look like? Well, it's actually not good news when it's presented as an exclusive club. And it's interesting that he would hold me off and say, no, 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 because in a way, what we've defined as the gospel, and I see this all the time in vacation Bible school, and I see this in, how we teach the kids and what bracelet you wear and, what the Roman road is and all these different strategies is what we've done is we've said the gospel is the onboarding. And what I'm coming to recognize is actually the gospel isn't the onboarding.
No.
No, the gospel is the thing. And
Yeah.
it's the whole thing. And I think that's what's really interesting about this is we've broken it into subsections. We've like phased approached it, right? We've said, well, there's the salvation event, and then there's discipleship, and then if you're approved and ordained, and then you can talk about it. It's like barrier upon middleman upon middleman upon barrier upon barrier. And you think about that, well, that doesn't reflect freedom at all. But even in the midst of that, this is the cool thing, Steve. It's funny. I think my friends that grew up in the church and obeyed all the rules hate it when some guy who was like a complete heroin addict, like the guy that I literally gave money to, and he calls me and goes, I gotta give it back to you. I'm like, no, no, no. He's like, dude, you gave me $400. I went and bought crack. I got higher than I've ever gotten. And the Lord Jesus appeared to me and told me to stop doing crack. So I did. And I'm like, hold on a second. So you didn't go to church, you didn't do all this. The Lord Jesus appeared to you and told you to stop doing crack.
Yeah.
And you know what? There is no debate that that guy is free. But
None.
all my Christian friends, right, that grew up in the church are the brother that's at home is literally saying, that guy's advocating that this gospel isn't about all the work that I've put in. And I won the Bible bee. I was number one in my class. I'm like, this is not the gospel. The gospel isn't the onboarding of the catechism. This is this onboarding. This is not it. We're confusing it with the gospel. And of course, it can't be illustrated any more than the thief on the cross who goes, today you will be with me in paradise. You can't, I mean, it defies all of those things. And of course, I feel like I'm making the case, but I don't have that baggage. I mean, I have some of it, but I don't have much of it at all. It's like, no, this is why it's so refreshing. Is that no, this whole thing isn't the construct of a system. It's a living, speaking person. And the amazing thing about it is, when it says faith comes through hearing,
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to me, all of the intricacies of what those words mean.
Yes.
Hold on a second.
Absolutely.
Faith comes through hearing. And I was like, well, I thought it was through reading. I thought faith came through reading. I thought faith came through attending church. I thought faith came through a revival. I thought faith came through listening to the pastor. No,
I
faith comes
thought
through
faith
hearing.
was a denominational belief system.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting too. And you've even talked about this idea that, you think by faith. Well, I have to like, and it's so cool what the Bible says about it too. It's this substance. And I love that term, this
Yeah.
idea that faith is a substance and it's this hope. And what I think is amazing about it is Well, where's all that reside? It resides in a living person who speaks to these ears that you have that you shouldn't cut off.
Yes.
And it's just, and you think of the richness of that and you go, what would this thing look like, Steve? What would it look like? Because I've always felt like I've always been somebody that sees the best in other people. Like I want to fan the flame. Like somebody tells me about something they're into, and I'm like super into it too. I don't know why. I'm like, well, that's cool, And this guy, like I got a buddy he's a trauma surgeon. I know nothing about it. I'm not interested in the sense of doing it myself, but I'm fascinated. I'm like, dude, I go to work and talk to Steve Staggs. You go to work and people like live or die. And he treats it, he's like, well, I'm kind of like a mechanic. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, I'm like a plumber or a mechanic. I was like, what? He goes, no, this stuff you don't realize. The body is like, it's like plumbing. The gallbladder is always in the same spot. I mean, some fat people have it in a different spot, but it's okay. But he's like very matter of fact about it. I'm like, how do you. And what's amazing about that is what if we were in a group, a gathering of people that you knew that people were for you hearing from the living speaking
Yes.
Jesus? What
Right
would that
on.
look like? What if people said,
Yeah.
man, I'm super excited about what he's going to say to you. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to tell you what it is because he talks to me differently than he talks to you.
Yes.
But boy, I love it when he talks to me. And you
Yes.
know what? If you're struggling and if your wife's got cancer, I'm going to be here next week. I'm going to be with you.
Yeah.
We'll be friends and I'm going to bear your burden and divide that pain if I can.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like,
Yep.
well, what comes out of that?
Right on.
Well,
Right
love
on.
and like acceptance and then judgment's gone. If you don't, there's no judgment if I don't have the corner on the truth.
That's
I
exactly
just know
right.
the guy who does.
Yeah. It's no more complicated than that.
But the implications of that, Steve, and it's sad to me in a way that, I'm optimistic, right? And I'm willing to think, well, Jesus can do anything, Steve. But I'll tell you what, the light's under a bowl, it feels like. And I'm not like a
Yeah.
negative Nancy. I'm like, it just feels like it's under a bowl.
Well, it is for a period of time, but again, now let's go to the heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away, even in that one-sided view of that verse. What it says is that no matter what it is that you're viewing, either in the heavens or on the earth, those things that are passing away, they are absent of my word. Now, here's the deal. That word is logos, and we can get into a whole different discussion about what that word logos means, because we don't have a direct correlation of logos to English. You have to explain that word, just like Rhema word. It's a different. We don't have a one-to-one correspondence. You have to explain it. But everything that does not possess my nature and character will fall away. So, Steve, what are you worried about?
Yeah.
That thing is going to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. It is not rooted in me. It does not have my nature and character. It's not aligned with my philosophy of life or how I designed the creation to function. That's the logos word. It does not transmit to another, the one who embraces it, my nature and character. And because of that, it will fall away. But that which does possess and embrace my logos, it never passes away. And that's why heaven and earth are going to become aligned and approach and come together again. There has been something that has inserted itself in there. That's okay, all part of the plan. But it's to show you what it is that we are going to rule against.
Yeah.
See? It's going to teach you how to rule in my nature and character. So it will pass away, but my word will never pass away, because there is nothing corrupt in what I say. There's nothing corrupt in who I am. There is nothing corrupt in my nature and character.
On the very term kingdom, You just said this. The people looked around at other places and said, "We need a king."
Yeah.
And the very nature of the fact that it's described as "My kingdom come, my will be done," this idea of a kingdom
Yeah.
on earth as it is in heaven is so interesting because that kingship is not separate. It's not you. It's not me, right?
Right.
And that's so beautiful. What we can wrap all this stuff up with is I was reading in one of the translations of Haggai, and I've spent quite a bit of time in Haggai for a long time,
Yeah.
and it says the term Lord of Hosts.
Hmm.
And I've always been curious about it, so I was like, I'm gonna dig into this one. And I was so blown away by it because it just fits into this whole thing, which is the definition of Lord of Hosts is an assembly of those for battle. And then you think about that, well, what's the whole point of this whole thing? And we know that the battle's not between flesh and blood, right? And I think what's really interesting is that we know it's not right, and that there are these challenges, and things are getting exposed that are really, really corrupt, Steve. I mean,
Yeah.
there's things that we're going to be learning here in the future, besides the fact that if you just put your head around war and killing people, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
But you see the things that people are doing to children, and you see the things that are happening with the consuming of people, and there's some really, really dark stuff,
Yeah.
and there's even more to be exposed. And I think about this, well, now that makes a lot of sense to me. Why would you be building, an army?
Yeah.
Why would you be building those for battle? The Lord of Hosts. Why would you have assembled and be assembling and training? It's interesting because obviously, what that battle is probably not how I define it. So once again, Steve, it's funny is like I get on these with you, have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah. Neither
And
one of
then
us do.
and then this happens and it's like, how could it be more profound than the last time? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Hey, we're getting into it, man. We're
Yeah, I know. I know.
we're
I
in the
know.
game.
We're in the game. That's right. We're in the game. Well, it's a super encouragement to me, Steve, and I've once again learned a lot. And it's cool because you think about what is it that resonates with you? Why does something land and burn itself on your hard drive,
Yeah.
right? That's not because of Steve's fancy words,
No.
right?
No.
That's because literally this is the whole thing, right? Just listening to the living Jesus, and it's amazing. Um, and that's the cool thing. The implications are just far and wide. Any last thoughts, Steve, before we hang it up for this 36th episode?
Hey, in today's world of education, it is a given and has been for many years about getting a college degree. It is as I was describing it to my son when he was getting ready to graduate from high school, I said, if there are a couple of different ways. If you're planning to be one who produces wealth that invites others into that, then you can go learn how that's done. Or if you are wanting to pursue a career path where you are an employee, where you work for another corporation and help produce wealth for them, then you pretty much need your rite of passage is your degree.
Yeah.
Some of that is changing in today's world.
Yeah.
But the point is that we are willing to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars anymore, and 4 years to 5 years to 6 years of commitment to get a degree so that we can be qualified to enter the workforce to get a reasonable wage. Well, I think I just posed the question, well, why not make that kind of an investment with Jesus where it doesn't cost you a penny, and it will position you for a life that nothing else in life can do. So whether you invest 4 weeks or 4 months or 4 years, if you start the journey, you'll start to find out that there's something at the end of that rainbow that is pretty dang cool. That then will so transform the way you view life when you see the nonsense that's going on with Epstein or in Israel or with Hamas or with the loonies that are in Washington. No longer are you weirded out by it because you're sitting with Jesus next to him in heavenly places, getting a bird's eye view of what's actually happening. And let me tell you what, that's what makes the investment worthwhile.
Well, that's a heck of an invitation.
You actually get to see what's going on. And let me tell you what, it's very different than what you see by the folks who are reacting in fear or postulating positions or speculating about stuff they don't know anything about. It's very, very different. And in it is that stability, that assurance, that exactly what faith says it does. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. It's a substance. So anyway, that's just what I would, invite folks to try out, and that's the essence of these episodes. We've probably said it 100 times so far.
Yeah. Wow.
It's worth the investment.
You remember that TV show, What's Happening?
No, it's not ringing a bell.
Who was the guy? I forget who the guy who's like dynamite. That's what I have.
Yeah,
Dynamite.
Jimmy something or other.
Yeah. That's why I was just thinking. I was like, this is so dynamite. Thank you, Steve.
My
Thank
pleasure,
you once again. Appreciate everybody who's been a part and been in the chat and everything, and you guys journeying with us. We've recorded another one, 36 episodes. We do have to figure out a way to take all of this content and get it broken up. I'm going to be thinking about how we do that. I've been looking into the whole audio thing as well for Mike. But Steve, thanks for your investment in me and in all these folks. And we will definitely, hopefully, catch you next week.
Lord bless everybody. Have a great weekend.
You too. All right. Episode 36 is in the books, folks. Right side up with Steve Staggs, man. When you look at the background that's on here, when Steve and I are on, I'm going to pull them up real quick. I'm going to look at this encore presentation. So look at this background. So when we first started this in episode 1, I was like, I want to find some sort of thing. So I found an image that was a city, and then I just cut it out and flipped it upside down, right? So we've got the city upside down at the top and the city right side up at the bottom. And it's such a great picture for this whole thing. It's like, I feel like, one, it's helping get things more right side up and you see them more clearly, but almost as the weight kind of gets onto one side, it almost flips over. And so I'm excited. I feel like there are real implications to all this, Steve, that are real practical and real meaningful. So you're not laboring in vain, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man.
You bet. All right, folks. It's a big deal. I hope you're encouraged not only by that, but also by what's going on, the timing of everything. I think we're going to see some amazing things coming. And, I'm anticipating that. But what an amazing, I was thinking about this, we talk about AI so much and we're like, oh yeah, there's going to be super intelligence. People are so into ChatGPT. I use it a lot, right? What am I looking for? What am I hoping for when I like go to ChatGPT? Maybe some help in writing it better, some insight, maybe help me search something better, maybe learn something. And it's really interesting that we would go to these tools. And here we are saying that the very nature of like all things reside in the living voice of Jesus. And that like this already exists, right? We're just building these proxies. And so thank you all for joining. We will catch you next time. Have a great weekend and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.